All right, welcome everybody to Learn to Read Crochet Patterns. My name is Dana. I am the editor of Fave Crafts and I will be emceeing today's class. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. If you're not familiar with Fave Crafts, we are a crafting website that aggregates tutorials from all over the internet. And you can sign up for our different newsletters that are broken down by interest, like Everyday Crochet and Trash to Treasure, etc. So you can sign up for any of our newsletters at favecrafts.com. We are recording the class and we will email a copy of that recording in about 24 hours. So keep an eye on your email for an email from Zoom with that recording. And you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions or the chat. We're going to bundle when we answer questions. So we'll answer questions right before our intermission and then again at the end. So send them in as you have them and we'll answer them all in one fell swoop. And I want to thank our sponsor for today's class. So welcome Hortense. Hortense is from Knitting with Chopsticks, and she is sponsoring today's class. Knitting with Chopsticks, a little bit about Knitting with Chopsticks. It was created as a way to give back and share easy knitting and crochet patterns with beginners everywhere. Hortense's goal is to break down patterns so they're simple enough for you to create exactly what you want the way you want it. She's an engineer by trade and a crafter by passion, which means all of her patterns have an extreme attention to detail, thorough explanations, and step-by-step pictures. When she's not working on a yarn project, you might find her diving at the beach or rewatching Grey's Anatomy for the 100th time and snacking on chocolate. She is from Belgium after all. And she has a membership community. So this is the Chopsticks Stitching Squad. This membership will help knitters and crocheters gain the inspiration, confidence, and skills to turn their creativity into beautiful creations while broadening their crafting horizon by teaching them knitting and crochet techniques, as well as her practical know-how and experience, providing patterns and a tight-knit community of worldwide crafting friends to cheer you on. So as a thank you for attending today's class, she's offering workshop attendees an exclusive 7-day free trial. And you can claim it at that link on the screen. It's programs.knittingwithchopsticks.com/squad 7-day trial. And I will drop that in the chat shortly. Lots of exciting things going on, which is awesome. Today, Hortense is hosting a blossoming blanket crochet along, and it starts today. It's a unique blanket full of texture inspired by spring and blossoming flowers. And it's designed by 11 of your favorite crochet designers online today. A new blanket stripe is released every Tuesday and Friday starting today, May 7th. And the event is free. And you can get the event details and sign up at knittingwithchopsticks.com. And I will drop the link specifically to the crochet along in the chat. Okay, fantastic. Lots of exciting things going on. I am going to turn it over now to Hortense. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me and for sharing all of that. It was awesome.
Of course. Yeah.
So I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see my presentations, which is more like notes, but anyway. And then I'm going to try to make it pretty so you don't have all the ugly things this way. So hi, everyone. Welcome to this workshop on how to read crochet patterns. So turn off your phone, close everything, turn off any distractions, grab a pen and paper if you want to take notes, and add your questions in the chat box. I'll break around the middle to answer any questions, and then at the end, just like Dana said. So now, why would you want to learn patterns? If any of those resonate with you, you're probably in the right spot. So you either have no idea how to even get started. Should you start at row 1? How do you select your materials? Should you read through the entire thing first? Or you're confused, you don't know how to decipher any of the all the symbols, what all the brackets and stars and all of that means. You're confused by all the abbreviations, or you don't know what half of the pattern information even means, all these sections that are at the top that designers write, and you just want to skip gauge, blocking, notes, anything like that you just don't want to look at. You should look at it. I will tell you how in a second and why. But if any of those resonate with you, you're in the right spot. Today we're going to learn what you need to know when you're tackling a new pattern, how to decipher a pattern step by step. We're going to walk through some concrete examples of some of my actual patterns. And if you're catching this live, you can ask any questions. If you're catching the replay, you can always reach out to me too. Now, this workshop is not for you if you're like an advanced crocheter and you've been reading patterns for years. You're probably not going to learn much new. If you're only looking to learn how to work with charts and graphs, unfortunately, I don't have time to cover this today. I do have a workshop about charts and graphs next week in my membership. So if you want to grab that 7-day free trial, you can join us. If you've decided that you can't read pattern and you aren't open-minded, I won't be able to help you. And if you're not willing to put a tiny bit of effort to get used to like pattern language, it's going to be hard for me to help you. So hopefully you're still with us. Otherwise, I won't get offended if you're leaving. Before we dive in, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Hortense. I'm the designer and most everything else behind Knit with Chopsticks, where I share my easy knitting and crochet patterns and love to teach you how to use them. When I started using patterns, I had no idea what I was doing. I spent a million hours looking for a pattern that would match what I want to make and the yarn I had on hand. And then I got stuck halfway and I didn't understand any of it. So I spent a lot of time figuring that on my own, up to the point where I'm now designing my own patterns. And hopefully I'll be teaching you everything I wished I knew before I started on my first pattern, so you don't have to struggle as much as I did, and you can get started straight away. So that's my goal today. So before we dive into the actual training, I just want to cover two like pre-training things. First off, I'm not going to start right off the bat with the row by row instructions. There are a lot of reasons why. There's a lot more information in the pattern than just the actual stitch by stitch, row by row instructions. And you do need all of that information for the row by row instructions to make sense and to turn out, to turn into the item that you want to make and that it's going to look like the pictures. So we are going to go over all of that first, and then we'll go into the row by row instructions. Don't worry, I'm not skipping that, but just have a little bit of patience so that you understand all the parts of a pattern, what information you need, where to find it, how to use it, and so on. And then I just want to highlight, in case you don't know, crochet has US and UK terms. It took me a long time to discover that when you're self-taught on the internet, you usually don't start with like a general introduction on crochet. So you might not notice, but even worse than having different terms, they use the same terms to refer to different things, which is so frustratingly confusing. So for example, a single crochet in US is called a double crochet in the UK, but a double crochet also means something different in the US. So that's a little bit frustrating and confusing, but we do have a table for you with like conversions. I have some free yarn jargon cheat sheets, I call them, that have like all the different tables that I will mention throughout the workshop. You can grab those for free, from my website. Then I can drop the link for that so you guys can get those. That would be awesome. Thank you, Dana. So I always have those with me so I can make any conversions I need. But just make sure when you start with any pattern, figure out if it's US or UK terms so that you don't get all confused. Usually designers will write it either around the abbreviation sections or like in the introduction, somewhere like that. Magazines usually are like always with the same terms. So if it's a US magazine, it's going to be US term. If it's a UK magazine, it's probably going to be UK term. If it's not written anywhere and you have no idea, one trick I like to use is to look for if the pattern has any single crochets. US terms have single crochet, UK term doesn't use the word single crochet. So if there's any single crochet, you're sure it's going to be a US pattern. It doesn't work the other way around, because if there is no single crochet, it doesn't mean, like, some patterns just don't use that stitch. But it's helpful in a lot of cases, so I wanted to share that. So now that we've that's cleared out, before we dive into like the row by row instructions, there's a few choices we need to make when you're starting a new project. First off, you're going to need to select a pattern. you're going to need to get the right tools to make your pattern, and you're going to have to pick your size if there's different sizes. So those are the three main choices that I want to go over with you guys. So first off, for selecting your pattern, so when you go on Ravelry, Pinterest, Etsy to find the perfect pattern, I want you to keep the following in mind. If you're new to patterns, I recommend avoiding having a pattern with different sizes first. Having different sizes means there's a lot more information condensed in usually the same amount of text. There's going to be a lot more numbers and a lot of like sections that apply to you and don't apply to you, and it can be quickly overwhelming. So if you're new to written patterns, I recommend picking one that doesn't have sizes to start. Get used to like the abbreviations and the way things are written, and then add in the complexity of sizes. I recommend selecting a pattern that also has like a photo tutorial or a video support, just so you can visualize what's happening or what's supposed to happening, and you can like double check your work. So this is a great way to like learn and get comfortable. Usually we're not sure of what we're doing. If we don't have any pictures to show us we're on the right track, we can get unsure, which is frustrating and like stressful, even if you're on the right track. Some patterns have like crazy, strange constructions, and you have no idea where you're going until you get there. So videos and photos are helpful for that. I recommend you stick to stitches and techniques you know, just like for the sizes. Having a lot of new things at the same time can be overwhelming. Of course, everything is like figure outable. So if there's like one or two new things, definitely go for it. And like every project should be an opportunity to learn something. But avoid having too many new things at the same time, because you'll get frustrated and overwhelmed. And finally, I recommend you grab the printable PDF version if that's available. Usually it's paid, but it's going to make your life so much more easy down the road, because then you can take notes, you can highlight things, you can keep track of things much better. And it's, especially in the beginning, it's much easier. Quick tip here, stitch patterns are actually a very good like practice reading patterns kind of project. They're usually very short, they don't include sizes, and they're usually very detailed and have either a video or step-by-step pictures, because like a new stitch is new to everyone. So those are a great way to practice reading patterns. So now that we have our pattern figured out, let's look at the materials that we need to use. So usually you're going to have a dedicated materials section somewhere at the beginning of the pattern that's going to tell you what yarn the designer used, how much you need, what hook size, and like any other items you need, tapestry needles, stitch markers, things like that will be listed there. So if we look at the yarn, the designer is typically going to tell you what brand and line of yarn they used and how much. How much can be either shared with the number of skeins or like the yardage. The yardage is more precise, but people are used to like just knowing how many skeins they need and not having to calculate how many yards are in a skein. So that's why we often give just number of skeins. But a few things I want you to consider if you're not going to use exactly what the designer says. You never have to use exactly what the designer says. I know a lot of people are scared the project won't turn out right, or they won't have enough yarn or anything like that. So they just stick to exactly what the designer has used. But you can definitely substitute your yarn. Unfortunately, we don't have time here to get into like a full workshop on yarn substitution. I do have one in the stitching squad, but a few things I want to highlight is, first off, look at the yarn weight. So the yarn weights are classified in categories 0 to 6, which it's very confusing because we call it yarn weight, but it's actually the thickness of the yarn and not the actual weight like in grams. But that's how it's called. So your yarn weight categories have a lot of different names for like different countries and different, I don't know, historically, there's a lot of different ways to call the same thing. So in my cheat sheets, you have a table for the yarn weights, which is this one here. It's going to tell you like the different names. So for example, a category 4 medium is also called worsted, Afghan, Aran, or 10-ply. There's some slight differences between like Aran and worsted. Usually Aran is a little bit thicker than worsted, but all of those classify as like a category 4. making sure that the yarn you're going to use is the same yarn category as the designer used is going to help a lot, making sure that your project turns out right. And like the sizing is going to be more or less right, and it's going to look correct. So I definitely recommend doing that. Now, unfortunately, us Europeans don't use this 0 to 6 system because that would be too easy. We just like to give you very cryptic information. Yarn companies usually will give you like the recommended hook and needle size like you have here, and like a standard gauge information. Maybe it's a bit small here, but it says like 11 stitches by 16 rows for 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. So with my table here, you can see that I have the crochet gauge, crochet hook size in US and mm. So you can look up in the table what this information corresponds to, so you know which category you're gonna work with. So in this case, we had 11 stitches by 16 rows. So that would be between a medium and a bulky. But if we look at the hook size recommended, it's a 6 or 7. In this case, it's millimeters. So that would be like a bulky weight would be in this column for bulky weights. So that's one way you can identify the yarn weight category your designer has used, or also for like any yarn you have in stash or any yarn you want to buy, if it's not classified with the main 6 categories or 7, sorry, you can use this information this way. So now that you know like what type of yarn you need to know how much you need. And here I just want to highlight skein sizes are very, very different from one brand to another and from like one line of yarn. Usually we go by 25 grams, 50 grams, 100 grams, and then like bigger skeins. But you have exceptions. For example, Woolies from Lion brand is 85 gram skeins. Don't ask me why, I have no idea, but that's what they chose to do. So there's no rules here. So you do need to check that you have the same total yardage as the designer recommends for your size. So it's the length of yarn that matters and not the weight, because the weight is going to be different depending on the yarn composition. So if you're using cotton, it's going to be heavier. So you're going to have less meters for the same weight than if you're using, for example, acrylic, which is very light, where you're going to have more meters for the same weight, even though it's the same thickness. So what we need to look at is the thickness and the total length of yarn. Always grab an extra skein just to be sure, especially if you're ordering online. So you have like the same dye batch and things like that. And you don't have any problems with like yarn being unavailable or discontinued, which can be very frustrating. So now that we have like our yarn figured out, one more thing, sorry, about yarn, the composition. So the yarn can be made out of different materials. And it's going to impact a lot the look and feel of your project. So I recommend you stick to the same like material or composition than the designer, especially for like garments and things like that. If you change, just know it's going to impact, and you can learn like how different materials are going to impact the softness, the drape, and the texture. But if you want to be sure that it's going to be the same look, just stick to the same composition and you should be okay. Now, if we look at our hooks, hooks also come in different sizes and shapes, and especially different countries like to call them different things because it wouldn't be funny otherwise. So again, I have a table in my cheat sheets to help you with this. If you have a close look at it, you'll see that the US sizes have a letter and a number. And they go from like small number is a small size to bigger numbers for bigger size. UK has just a number, but goes the other way. So a big UK number means a very small hook. And millimeters are, I find the easiest because they're just in millimeters. They're the actual diameter of your hook. And usually on the hook and anywhere, it's going to have the units millimeters. So this one is pretty clear which one is meant. For the US ones, sometimes we only give the letter, sometimes we only give the number, depends on the hook brands, on the designers, things like that. So with this table, you should be able to figure out your conversions pretty easily. Now, hooks come in different materials. This is not going to impact your project directly. It might impact your gauge a little, but you can use whatever material you prefer. Designers and patterns will usually not tell you what material your hook needs to be made of because that's your choice. There's wood, stainless steel, plastic, any other fun new inventions come out all the time, but those are the most common, sorry. So depending on your gauge, we'll talk about gauge in a minute, but depending on that, you might need to use a different hook size than the one that's recommended, and that's totally okay. So if your pattern tells you you need a 5 mm hook, it's always good to be sure you have like a 4.5 and a 5.5, just in case you need to adjust with your gauge hook too, and not like you're not sure 100% you're going to use the 5 mm because the pattern says 5 mm. It might be different for you. So now that we have our materials and our yarn hooks and everything and our pattern, let's look at sizes. So when a pattern has different sizes, that information usually has like its own section. There's like two sort of patterns, There's patterns that are like pretty simple shaped, and then they usually give you like the stitch repeat. So for example, blankets, washcloths, scarves will usually give you the stitch repeat so that you can adjust the size this way. So it's going to tell you like one repeat is this many stitches. So you need to make sure that your total stitch count follows the repeat. So one example would be if the pattern tells you that stitch repeat is 3 + 1, it means you have to change a multiple of 3 stitches plus 2 for the edges. So those edges are not the starting chain. The starting chain comes on top of that. So for example, we could have in this case something like 20 stitches. That's 18 is a multiple of 3 plus 2 for the edges. So we're going to chain 20 stitches, and then we're going to chain 1 or 2 for our starting chain before we turn and do like our first single crochet or double crochet. Now for garments, there are two different ways we indicate sizes. The first way is to give the size that the item, like the body size that the item is intended to fit. So it's going to tell you like a bust measurement of 100, 110 centimeters for the different sizes. And you just need to measure your own bust and then pick the size that it matches or that's like the closest match. The other way to do it is to give you the dimensions of the actual garment, the finished garment, and then tell you how much ease you need, like how much ease the pattern is designed with, so that you can then pick your size. So then you're going to measure your own bust, you're going to add the designer recommended ease, and then see which size corresponds. So this might seem a little bit more tricky because there's like an extra step, but it also gives you more flexibility on choosing your fit. So if you're like in between sizes, you can decide you want it a bit looser or a bit closer to your body than the pictures. This way it's easier to see any adjustments or any like in between. Or if you see the design, but you know you want it looser, you know if you go up a size, it's going to be this many centimeters or inches looser. So you have a better idea. It also helps that when you're blocking and finishing, you know the actual sweater measurements and not just your body measurements. So you know what dimensions to block it to. So I was talking about ease. So just in case you don't know, ease is like how much bigger or smaller your item is compared to your body. So we have positive and negative ease. Positive ease is like the picture on the right. It's a loose fit, and it's going to be like your garment is this many centimeters bigger than your body. And negative ease is when your item is actually smaller than your body. So you're going to stretch it when you wear it. It's going to stretch out a little to have like a form-fitting effect. The further you are from zero, so the bigger the ease, the more extreme it is. So if it's positive ease, it's going to be much looser. If it's negative ease, it's going to be much tighter because it's going to be that much dip. Like 0 is your body size, basically. Now, if it's not specified, if it's positive or negative ease, you can usually assume it's positive ease. And the pictures should give you a pretty good idea very quickly if you're in the case of positive or negative ease for like a specific pattern. So if we look at an example here, the sweater is designed in sizes XS to 5XL. This is how the sizes are noted in the pattern. The picture illustrates the medium size. And then you have like all the garment measurements. And I tell you, the sweater is designed with a normal fit, which is 5 to 10 centimeters, is at the bust. So let's say you measure your own bust and you get to 90 centimeters. So you need to add 5 to 10 centimeters to that. So we're going to look for a size that's between 95 and 100, which would be a medium size, which is just under 100. Now, if you know you want it tighter than the pictures, you could go with the small, but that's going to be like 0 ease. So it's going to be very form-fitting. If you want it even looser, it's going to be a large, but that's like 10 centimeters looser. So it's your choice, and it gives you more flexibility to choose your size according to what you want, which is the whole purpose of making your own clothes. Now that you know how to pick the size you want to make, let's look at how do you follow the correct instructions to actually make the size you want to make. The size section should also tell you how the sizes are noted throughout the pattern. Usually we use the round parentheses to indicate the different numbers for different sizes. So we can either have like the whole size range in one parenthesis, or split it into groups when there's a lot of sizes. And what you need to do is you need to always follow the same number. So for example, if I'm making a large, I'm going to follow the third number inside the bracket. Everywhere there is this round bracket, I need the third number. Anything else you can ignore, basically. So if we look at an example here, I'm making a large. So if the pattern tells me to like make this many stitches, I just look at the third number inside the bracket, ignore everything else, and I'm going to make 52. Your yarn quantities in your materials list are going to be indicated the same way. So in this case, I used like 2 sets of brackets, but it's just the same. If you need to follow the third number for your size, you follow the third number for your yarn quantities. So everywhere in your pattern, you just follow whatever number you need inside your brackets. Now, when you buy the printable PDF, you can go through and highlight your size throughout the entire pattern before you start, and you can ignore everything else. So that's going to make it much easier to have way less numbers to worry about if you do that before you actually get started. So that's out of your way and you only focus on whatever you need for your size. Sometimes you even have like entire sections that you can ignore because they're for other sizes only. So that's great to take out of the way. So now that we have all of that figured out, you probably think, okay, now we can get started stitching, right? Well, not just yet. There's one more very important thing I need to bother you with, which is gauge. You've probably heard about it. Unfortunately, I can't go into like a full tutorial on gauge because that's also like a 1-hour workshop, which we do have in the membership too. So if you want to watch that, you can grab your trial and go check it out. But just like the main things, gauge is, simply put, it's how many stitches and how many rows you have in a 10 centimeter or 4-inch square. Now we use 10 centimeters or 4-inch, that's the standard. Some designers for some patterns might use something different. So make sure you read carefully the gauge section so that you're sure what size it refers to. If it's not saying anything, if it just tells you gauge is 15 stitches by 20 rows, then you can assume it's 4-inch, 10 centimeters. But if it's indicated like, sometimes when you work in the round or you make small things, you will say like after 3 rounds, you should get this size or something like that. That's another way to indicate gauge. So if the pattern tells you like, for this pattern, the gauge is 16 stitches by 20 rows in double crochet for 10 centimeters, it means that if you chain 16 stitches and you crochet 20 rows, you're going to have a 10 centimeter square, basically. So it's important that you check with your yarn and hook that you're going to use. Make sure you use the actual stitch that is featured in the pattern or that the gauge is given in. And then you're going to make a swatch, which is just like a little square sample. And you're going to check that you get the same number of stitches. Now, why do we need to do that? Not just to be annoying. You need to do that to make sure that your dimensions are going to turn out right. So if you don't check your gauge and you don't have the same number of stitches per 10 centimeters or 4 inches, you're not going to end up with the same final dimensions. Sorry to tell you, there's no way around it. If you don't check, you have no guarantee that it's going to turn out the right size. Now, if you're making something where the size really doesn't matter to you, for a basket, for example, or amigurumi, or even eventually a blanket, as long as you're using the recommended yarn and hook, you should be fine, and your size is going to end up close enough. For example, a blanket, if it's like 5 centimeters bigger or smaller, usually it doesn't matter. But if it's a garment or like socks, 5 centimeters make a big difference. So that's when you definitely want to make your gauge swatch properly. I also highly recommend you block your gauge swatch because dimensions are always given blocked. And your gauge can change a lot with blocking, which also will give you a very good idea of how the final product will look and feel, like the drape, the stretch, any bleeding and things like that. If you don't know what I'm talking about with blocking, unfortunately, again, I don't have time to get into a whole blocking workshop. I do have one in the membership again. But let's dive into the actual stitching. Before we do that, do you guys have any questions? Dana, can you help me out if there's any questions here?
Yes, we have 2 questions so far. So the first one from Joan, and she's asking, will a hook be the exact same size from plastic to wood to metal, or do they vary even if they are the same number?
So they should be the exact same size. Now the shape of the hook, so different brands have different shape. Different shapes means you're gonna hold your yarn a little bit differently, which is gonna give you a different tension. So although the actual hook has the exact same size, as long as you're using like quality products, if it's like a $50 hook made in China, there is no guarantee on the production process. But normally the same number is going to give you the same size, but that doesn't mean it's going to give you the same gauge. Trust me, I've been tricked. I have different hooks and I got lazy and I was upstairs and I didn't want to get my hook downstairs and I used another one and it was not right. So the shape is going to be impacting your gauge.
Great. Another question came in, so we've got 2 more now. Victoria's asking, do you choose a size, this is for garments, based on your bust or your widest area, for example, your hips?
It's going to depend on the pattern, and it's going to depend on how it's constructed and what information the designer gives you. A lot of sweaters and like tops are given by bust dimensions. Now, if you're like me and you have very wide hips and you know it's like a long sweater and you know it's like constructed straight, then I'm going to look at my hip dimension because I don't want it to get stuck there. Or I'll have like a split hem, or you need to look at the construction and the design and see how it fits and what dimension is important to you. Yeah, I hope it helps.
Great. And then Mira is asking, there are a lot of patterns lacking quality control, even paid ones. Do you have some tips on how to avoid those?
So there's no like pattern creation police. So no one's checking up on us designers for like how we do things and if we get it tech edited or tested. I do recommend you look at reviews, ratings. Usually if a designer, you can see they've sold like thousands of patterns and have like 5 stars reviews. You're going to be pretty sure they're like well established and have probably some tech editing and some processes in place. That doesn't mean small designers don't have quality patterns. Definitely not what I'm saying. But unfortunately, there's no like rule. I would say like try one, and if you're like, you have to, once you find a couple of designers that you like the way they write it and how they explain it, just stick to those. That's what I do, but yeah.
Great. Let's see. Now, Cassie's asking, will the article displayed, so in the screen share here for the webinar, be provided for reference when the webinar is over? Most of this content is in the cheat sheets that have been mentioned. So I can drop that link again momentarily. They're free on Hortense's website on
Yes.
Knitting with Chopsticks.
And I actually have a very similar workshop, but it's both for knitting and crochet in one workshop in the membership. So if you grab that trial, you can get the notes from the membership.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Fantastic. And
so all my workshops come with notes like this.
Great. Let's see. And the last comment here is from Linda. She has many boy brand hooks. Some are made in the US, some are made in Mexico, and some are made in China. Oh, that's so interesting. Some of the ones, so the ones made in the US and China are the same, but the ones made in Mexico are not. So they vary across like where they're made, even within the same brand. So that's an interesting
They
note.
shouldn't, but that's the quality control of the brand. Like theoretically, a size is a size, but like if you look at production processes and so on, there's always a tolerance. So it's gonna be depending on the brand and how picky they are with their quality and where it's produced, gonna be different.
I think this is the last question we've got. Let's see. This is from Anonymous. They say, I usually work with different hooks for one pattern, but I do a gauge swatch for all my hooks to test if the tension is the same. So should I still do a gauge swatch for each project?
Unless you use the exact same yarn and the exact same hook and the exact same circumstances. So like over the years and as much as you practice, your tension is going to change. If you're using like 2 projects in a row with the same yarn, same hook, you don't need to make a gauge swatch again. For 2 years, my sister refused to use anything else than a 5mm hook and a DC stitch with that yarn because she didn't want to gauge swatch. So that was frustrating for me because I'm her private designer apparently. But usually it's very rare that you get to use the same hook, same size, same yarn, and same stitch. So you usually have to make a gauge swatch again.
That's all the questions so far. I'm going to do a brief intermission now to talk about our upcoming classes and an offer from our digital magazines. And then let's see. And then we'll dive right back in. So actually, Hortense, I think you need to stop sharing for me to take it back over, from what I can tell. Thank you. All right. So if you all are enjoying today's class, come back again next week because we have Learn to Read Knitting Patterns with Hortense, same day and time, Tuesday at 11 a.m. Central. And if you are a new knitter or you just want to finesse your knitting reading skills, come on by next week. And then the week after that, we have Learn to Sew a Heating Pad from a Sweatshirt. So that's a fun upcycled craft tutorial. And that's going to be with a designer called Highly Crafty. That is on Tuesday, May 21st, also at 11 a.m. Central. So we have 3 weeks in a row of classes. And I will drop the link in the chat to sign up for those. You can go to favecrafts.eventbrite.com or Zoom directly. And all those links will also be in the recap email. And we like to do an offer for anybody who attends our Fave Crafts workshops from our digital magazine, I Like Crochet. Anybody who attends our workshops gets an introductory offer from our digital magazine, and that is just for $5 US. What that comes with is 6 issues, so the 6 upcoming issues for the year. Plus you get access to all of the archives, and the magazine's been around since 2014, so you've got a decade worth of patterns. It's hundreds of patterns, potentially in the thousands by now. Somebody had asked about quality control. These are all professionally tech edited patterns. So you're paying for a quality product, it's ads free, and you get access to all those archives for just $5 US. The link to get that is ilikecrochet.com/virtual24. And once again, I'll include that in the chat and the recap emails. All right, and now I will stop my screen share and back to you, Hortense.
Let me just put my screen share again. Okay, so now that we have figured out most of everything outside of the row by row instructions, we can start looking at the actual like step-by-step instructions. Now there are 3 sections in your pattern that's going to be very useful and that you're going to refer to very regularly, which are the abbreviations, the notes, and your special stitches and repeated patterns. So those are really sections that you use while you work through the pattern. You're going to refer to them. It's not something that you read and then just never look at again. You're going to want to keep them handy, basically. So first off, the abbreviations, they usually have their own sections. They're either all the way at the top of the pattern or all the way at the bottom, sorry. And magazines and publications usually like to either have them on their website as like a overall reference or like give them once for the entire issue and not have that space taken up every time because they will use the same abbreviations for every pattern. Just a quick reminder, US versus UK, we talked about this already, but I just want to make sure you don't get tricked. And usually designers will tell you what country system they're using. Now, there are very standard abbreviations for crochet, which you can find in your cheat sheets or on the Craft Yarn Console website. So it's always going to be the same abbreviations for, well, I don't know anyone who doesn't use the standard abbreviations. But if there's like a new stitch you don't know, you might have like a new abbreviation you're not familiar with. So it's always good to read through the abbreviation section so you can see what stitches are used, what techniques are used in the pattern. It gives you a good idea like of the level of the pattern, and if there's a lot of new to you things. YouTube has a gazillion video tutorials for like every stitch and technique, so you can like definitely learn and figure it out. But if like 90% of the abbreviations are new to you, it's probably going to be a lot of work to work through that pattern and figure it all out. So I always recommend like go at it things step by step and don't try to learn everything new in one shot. Now the notes section is probably the most important section of your pattern, because this is where the designer is going to tell you how to decipher and read their pattern. And this is where not everyone does the same thing, especially in crochet. There's a lot of different standards, or there's no standard, however you want to see it. But this section is going to tell you how repeats are indicated. So most patterns will use either the star symbol, the round brackets, or the square brackets for repeats. It's going to tell you like any special notations, and it's going to tell you the final stitch count at the end of the row or round, which is often given in like round brackets or like the pointy brackets that I don't know how they're called. And then specifically for crochet, it's going to tell you whether the turning chain counts as a stitch or not. So that's something that tripped me up a lot. So when you crochet in rows, you need to have a chain at the beginning of your row to get to the height of the stitch you're going to use. This is called like the turning chain or the climbing chain. And to make your edges neat, you're going to either consider that one as a stitch or not. So let me just show you with this picture. If you count it as a stitch, it means that this turning chain is your first stitch. So you're not going to make the next stitch in here, but in the next stitch. If it doesn't count as a stitch, this doesn't count. So you're going to make it in the first stitch. And at the end of the row, it means you're going to make the last stitch here in the chain 2 of the turning chain, because that counts. And in this case, you're not going to use that turning chain. It's a lot of like personal preferences, which system you want to do. I recommend you follow whatever the designer did, because sometimes with repeats and so on, if you can get your stitch count off if you decide to not do it their way, especially in the beginning when you're not used to things. I like to always not count it as a stitch when it's worked flat, but count it as a stitch when it's worked in the round, because then it's symmetrical. So it's not like one designer might not do the same thing for every pattern. And sometimes we don't do the same thing for every piece of the pattern, but usually we write it out. So in the notes, I'm going to tell you it doesn't count as a stitch throughout the pattern, except if I mention it differently inside the pattern. And then if there's a section where I do it differently, I will tell you in this case, it does count as a stitch. So that's my note here. Another thing, a lot of crochet designers like to use crochet shorthand, which just means we use as the least amount of words possible. So I like to define it every time in my patterns, but not everyone does. It just means that depending on where the number is, if it's before or after the stitch, you're going to either work in the next 5 stitches or work 5 stitches in one. So if the number is after the stitch, it's going to be single crochet 5 in the next 5 stitches. And if it's before, it's going to be 2 single crochet in the same stitch. Another way to write the same thing is to add all the words I just said, basically. When you have like an easy instruction like this, it can seem that it's easier to have it with a lot of words. But when you get like different stitch repeats inside the same rows and so on, it can get very long instructions if you put all the words. So that's why a lot of us like to use crochet shorthand, which you just need to get used to a little bit. but it's not like, it's just a rule, like if it's before or after the stitch, it means something different. So that's for the notes. Now, the special stitches and repeated patterns is the section where anything that's not a basic stitch is going to be explained. So the basic stitches in crochet are like slip stitch, chain, single crochet, half double, double, treble, and that's basically it. Anything else should be defined here. Some of the common stitches like puffs, bubbles, and beads should be defined because they can be made in a lot of different ways. So you need to, even though you think you know how to make a puff stitch, there's a surprising amount of ways to make a puff stitch. So check the section and see how the designer does it, how many loops, and if they do a closing chain or not, and things like that. I just worked up the sample for the blossoming blanket, and there's a lot of puff stitches and bead stitches in like all the textures. And I think every single designer did it differently. I even got tricked following their patterns because I was like, okay, a puff stitch, I do it this way, but they do it differently. So make sure you check. If you see something that is not in here and it's not a basic stitch, it's probably that the designer considers it as a basic stitch and that a simple like search on YouTube will show you how to do it and that it's like a pretty standard way to do it, hopefully. Usually designers are pretty good at defining everything. I have found so far, but just in case, YouTube usually has the answers. Now, if there's like a specific combination of stitches or combinations of rows that are repeated throughout the pattern, to avoid having to like write out all those instructions every time, we like to define it up there. For example, if you have like a flower lace repeat, you'll define like the flower lace repeat is these 10 rows repeated over like 20 stitches. And then in the pattern, you just to like make 5 flower lace repeats. And then you just have to refer back to those repeated sections to see like the actual step-by-step instructions if you haven't memorized it by then. So those sections are very useful to refer to. Now we can dive into the actual row by row instructions now that we've read through all of the rest of the pattern. A few tips here, what I like to call the snail approach, just to make sure that you don't rush and you don't get overwhelmed and you avoid any mistakes. Unfortunately, in crochet, there's no way to fix your mistakes. You have to frog. You can't like think back or things like that. So it's always good to try to go step by step so you don't get disappointed and have to frog and be sad. I hate frogging. Anyway, so I recommend buying your printable PDF so you can highlight things, you can scratch out things, take notes and everything like that. Then highlight your size if you're using different sizes, cross out anything that's not relevant to you and your size. I like to write out my repeats. So if I'm going to say repeat these 4 rows 5 times, I'll write in the margin like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can cross off anytime I've done them and I can keep track very easily of where I'm at. You also have some digital ways to do this. I know Knit Companion is an app that's used a lot. You can, yeah, you just need to like see what system works for you exactly, but find a way to write out your repeats and cross them off. So you know where you're at. Take it 1 row at a time. Don't try to read through all the row by row instructions before you start, because you'll just get overwhelmed and panic and not even get started, although it looks much harder than it is. You can definitely do it. If you don't know something, look it up to see what it means. As I said, YouTube or Google have a lot of tutorials and step-by-step like stitch instructions and techniques. So you should be able to find what you need. After each row around, check your stitches. Make sure you have the right amount of stitches and you don't see like any mistakes. The earlier you catch it, the better. And I recommend you take the time to frog it now instead of thinking like, oh, it's okay, it's just like 1 stitch. It won't make a difference. But then later on in your pattern, it might make a big difference with repeats and then it's not working out and then you have to go all the way back. So try to fix your mistakes as soon as you see them. Now, when you're checking your stitch count, 1 tip, count again before you start frogging. Most of the time, it's my counting that's wrong and not my actual stitching. So make sure you count twice and get the same number before you start frogging, especially for like big numbers. You can use like stitch marker every like 20 stitches or every like 50 stitches so that you can easily keep track and check your counting. Also check the pattern and make sure that the stitch count in the pattern makes sense. So what I mean here is if I tell you like row 5, these instructions, and then it's this many stitches, make sure that the instructions, if you count up the stitches, match the stitch count. We try our best not to make mistakes. We have texters and tech editors, but somehow counting mistakes still slip in. So make sure the instructions are correct before you frog, because otherwise you're going to stitch it up again and you're going to get the same problem. Don't hesitate to reach out to the designer if you think there's a problem. We are always happy to correct mistakes in our patterns and know about them. So don't think you're like bothering us with helping us fix any mistakes that slip through the cracks. And then finally, mark your progress. So it's very rare that you can like work your entire project in one go. So I like to strike through anything I've completed and then like put a line and a date and a date when I stop. And I know I won't come back to it like in the next hours. If you just put like an arrow or a cross for where you're at, you'll end up with like a lot of arrows and you don't know which one is the latest one. I've been there, so put the date, it helps. So that's my recommendation. And then finally, try to learn to read your project. So when you're stitching up rows and rounds and repeats, try to look at how the stitches work with each other, how they build up on each other, what they look like, so that you can know what like one row looks like, what 2 rows look like, so you can like learn to count your rows on your project and you don't have to rely only on your notes and like on your repeat counts. That helps a lot with like working up things, also like repeats, what they look like and how they are worked, so that you don't always have to refer to your pattern all the time. But that unfortunately just comes with times and practice and patience. But it will naturally come to you, don't worry. So let's look at a few examples now to see how all of this is put into practice. So if we look at the date night purse, which is one of my patterns, it's a very simple pattern. It has no sizes. So the instructions are always going to tell you how many stitches to chain, or if you're working in the round or like a magic loop or foundation stitches, but usually you start with a chain. So in bold is the actual pattern and then like the explanation that comes with it. So the pattern tells you with your 4mm hook, which is a US G6, you're going to chain 50 plus 1. So that plus 1 is your turning chain. I like to not say like chain 51 because some people like to use a different stitch count for their turning chain, especially for like double crochet. Some of us do 2 chains for the turning chain. Some of us like to do 3 chains. So this way, you know that 1, 2, 3 is the turning chain. And if you want to adjust my pattern to like make a different stitch or anything like that, you know what is the actual stitch count and what is the turning chain. So the second row is going to tell you single crochet in the second stitch from the hook and then single crochet across and turn. And you get 50 stitches at the end of your row. So those like arrow brackets for the row count, stitch count. So from your notes, you're going to know that's what those arrows mean. It's also going to tell you in the notes that for this pattern, my turning chain doesn't count, which is why I'm doing a single crochet in my second stitch from the hook. And I'm telling you to turn at the end of the row. Now, some patterns will not have that turn instructions and just assume that's like obvious. If you're working flat, you always need to turn. If you're working in the round, you're usually going to either slip stitch in the turning chain or you're going to continue working in like a spiral. But normally the pattern should explain that. Hopefully. Otherwise, you just need to like look at, if it tells you to slip stitch, you know it's like working in the round. Yeah. And then my next row is going to be chain 1. And then you have those square brackets. And in the square brackets, I have chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. And then I'm going to do the square brackets across and turn. So now I can see that my square brackets in my note sections, it tells me that's how my repeat is written. So it doesn't tell me how many times I need to repeat it. So it means I need to repeat it until I get to the end of the row. What am I going to repeat? I'm going to repeat a chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and then single crochet. If I don't have a number here, it means it's just one. Usually chains will always have a number, but if you just have to do one single crochet or one double crochet, we'll just tell you single crochet or double crochet and not have the number. So that's good to know. No number means one. So this is what this looks like in blue here. You're gonna do like a single crochet, chain one, skip one, single crochet, chain one, skip one, all the way across. Now, if you look at where you're gonna make your first single crochet, so we said chain one, that's my first stitch, and then chain one, skip one, single crochet. So I'm gonna actually chain two, but skip just one. Now my turning chain didn't count as a stitch. So I'm gonna skip this one and I'm gonna work in that one. Another way to write the exact same thing is with the star notation, I like to call it, which would be chain one, star, which indicates the start of the repeat, chain one, skip the next stitch, single crochet in the next stitch, and then repeat from the start until the end of the row and turn. So you can see this is the exact same thing with a lot of words. I'm dyslexic, so the more words, the less clear it is to me. But I know some people like one way or the other better. Unfortunately, you just have to find designers that write it the way you like it or get used to both ways. Both are like equally common, I think. But that's how you translate from one to the other. Now, if we look at another example, which is this dress, which has sizes, so that we can look at how sizes are, like how you take those into account. So the pattern starts with your 4mm US G5 hook, G6, sorry, hook, and you're going to chain all of these numbers plus 2. Now, in the size section, we see that the sizes are written this way, and I want to make the medium. My medium is my second size inside my bracket. So I just look at the instruction for the second size inside the bracket, which is 48. And I'm going to chain 48 to make my medium plus 2, which is my turning chain. Now my first row is going to be double crochet in the third chain from the hook, and then double crochet in each stitch across and turn. And then in my row brackets, I have my end of row stitch count. And in this case, I should have 48 stitches. Next row is very easy. You're just double crochet across. So here you can see there is no stitch count at the end of the row. If there is no stitch count, it means that the stitch count didn't change compared to the previous row. So we're trying to have the least amount possible of numbers. Like we try not to have like information repeat itself to have it less confusing. So if we're not saying anything, it means it didn't change. So it means here you should still have 48 stitches at the end of that row. Now, the next row is getting very interesting. So it says chain 4, skip 2, and then you have the square brackets with bead stitch, which I tell you counts as 2 stitches, chain 1, skip 2, square bracket. So everything in the square bracket, we're going to repeat 3 times, and then we're going to double crochet until the end of the row and turn. So if we look at this, we can see here we have a chain 4, but our turning chain is only 2. So the turning chain of 2 doesn't count as a stitch in the pattern, but the next 2 chains do count as a stitch because they're going to be used to bridge over the skip 2. And then you're going to make the bead stitch. Now the bead stitch is obviously defined in my special stitches section as this. So it's like a lot of yarn overs and pull throughs. So this is how I make my bead stitch for this pattern. And you're going to repeat the bead stitch, chain 1 and skip 2 3 times. So those 3 stitches, the bead stitch counts as 2 and then a chain 1. You're going to repeat that 3 times. And then you double crochet until the end of the row. So here I show you again where you make that first stitch. So you have a chain 4, which is actually a chain 2 turning chain, and then a chain 2 to bridge the skip 2 gap. My chain 2 turning chain doesn't count as a stitch, so I'm not making my first stitch here. So 1, 2, I'm skipping, and this is the one. And if I look at what it looks like, these are my 3 beads with my skipped stitches and my double crochet until the end of the row. So if you just like break it up piece by piece in your row instruction and just do like one little block at a time, you will be fine. Now, if we look at one more pattern, because I want to show you how everything comes together when it gets a bit more complicated. This sweater is made out of hexagons. So you're going to start with chain 4 that you're going to join in the round with a slip stitch to make like a circle. And then you're going to work inside the circle. So my first round instruction, sorry. So here I'm being very sneaky and I just put R1 instead of row or round. It's very common to just put R. It's usually easier for people when you say row or round so that it's clear if you're working in rows or in the round. But sometimes you don't want to make mistakes, or some people like to have it shorter and just put R and don't define it. That's pretty common. But with the slip stitch at the end or the turn instructions, you can identify if it's in the round or not. So in this case, I'm working in the round. I'm saying the chain 2, which for this section counts as a double crochet here and like throughout the section. And I'm going to make in the circle 2 double crochet, chain 1, and then repeating 3 double crochet, chain 1 5 times and join at the end of the round. And I'm going to have a total of 24 stitches. So I'm going to have this, which is like 3 double crochet with a chain and 6 times total with like that first one that had the turning chain with 2. Now the next round, sorry, I'm going to keep getting those mixed up, is where it gets interesting because we have both a mix of the square brackets and the round brackets. Now the round brackets in the note sections, it's telling me I'm doing all of this inside the same stitch, and the square brackets are a repeat. So I need to chain 2, make 2 double crochet in the next 2 stitches, and then I'm going to work all of this inside the chain 1 space. And then I'm going to double crochet 3 more stitches. I'm going to repeat that around until I don't have any chain 1 spaces left. And I'm going to work the final repeat of those stitches in the last chain 1 stitch and then join with a slip stitch. So around usually means until you cannot make a full repeat again. And then when you can't make the full repeat again, you just do whatever's written after the repeat instruction. You need to practice for this to be like 100% easy. So I recommend you like grab those notes and like actually try to stitch it up and read the notes at the same time to make it like 100% clear. But hopefully I am clear enough. I hope it's helpful anyway. What more did I want to say? Yeah, so this is what it's coming out to. Then the next round is going to be here. You can see I said equal increasing hex round. I'm just going to give it a nickname here because it's a round instruction that we're going to use a lot. And instead of just telling you to repeat round 3 and then you have no idea what it means, like what round 3 was, I'm giving it like an increase name so that it's easier for you to remember when you're at round like 75, what the hex increase round is probably easier than telling you round 3 and then you have to scroll all the way back. So that's why we do that and how it's indicated. And then here on the next instruction is where it gets interesting. See, we have those round brackets with a lot of different numbers. This is where the sizes come in. So up to now, we had the same instructions for all the sizes, but here we're going to get some different sizes. We're making the like third size inside the bracket, like second size inside the bracket, so third size total. And here you can see I'm going round 4 to round 20. So the round count is going to be different depending on the size. And then I'm going to end up with a different stitch count. Now, one trick that tripped me up all the time, keeps tripping me up, is make sure you count your rounds correctly when you have like a range like this. So round 4 to 20, you would think that's just 16 rounds. But if you actually count them on your hands, it's going to make 17, which is very, very frustrating because I keep getting it wrong. So just make sure you always like 20 minus 4 plus 1, because you actually need to do the round 4 and the round 20. So it's going to be 17. Just something I wanted to highlight and make sure was clear for everyone. And then I have a final example where I just want to show you when some sections of the pattern are not for all the sizes, how we write that down. So here in this first sweater, you can see that this section says like XS and then there's like a dash. We either use a dash or like a capital X to mark off that like this is not relevant for this size, so that you can still keep following the same number inside the bracket. So if you're doing the medium large size, it's always going to be the second information inside the bracket, even when there are parts that like some sizes this is not relevant to. If I would remove all the dash, then you wouldn't know which number you need to follow. It wouldn't always be the second one inside the bracket. So that's why we do that. And this way, you know directly if you're making the small size, this is not relevant to me, so I can just skip the entire section. So that's all I had for you guys today. If you have any questions, I am more than happy to answer them.
I actually don't have any questions at this point.
I hope that's a good sign.
I think so.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so we can see.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. Mira says, thank you for a clear and systematic lecture.
Thank you. Happy it was clear and systematic. I like those descriptive words.
Yes, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you. Oh, wait, let's see. Oh, Linda's just saying, when I'm trying to figure out a pattern, I use old yarn and practice until I get it right. Awesome.
That's a very good idea, because if you're using the actual pattern yarn you're going to use, when you work it up a few times, the thickness tends to change and then your gauge changes again. Gauge is a very sneaky, tricky little thing. So using old yarn or like yarn you don't really care about is a very good idea.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
If the pattern just has symbols, is there a cheat sheet? Yes, I have a crochet chart cheat sheet on my website that I can find the link for. And I also have a workshop on how to learn to read those next week in my membership. Let me try to.
All right. Well, while you pull that up, I just want to thank you, Hortense, so much for teaching today. And if folks are not following Knitting with Chopsticks on social media already, the links are here on the screen. It's just at Knitting with Chopsticks on Pinterest and Instagram and Facebook. There's the link in the chat for the crochet chart cheat sheets. Awesome. And yeah, the recording is coming out. I will be sending that email tomorrow in about 24 hours, so you'll be able to rewatch. All right. And Linda's asking.
Linda's.
Go ahead.
You mean the blanket, the crochet along blanket? I do have an ebook for the entire blanket, and I will pop it for you guys.
Awesome. And I'll include that link in the recap email tomorrow.
Thank you. Sorry for all the links.
Oh, no, it's fantastic. I'm sure everyone appreciates all the great resources and the exciting things going on. Awesome. All right. Well, I'll let you guys go. I'll let everybody go. Thank you again so much, and tune in next week for Learn to Read Knitting Patterns if you are interested. All right. Thank you again so much, Hortense, for class today.
See you next week.
All right. Farewell.